Hi friends! So firstly, I want to say thank you if you purchased my template. You guys are amazing. Let's jump right in. So the first thing you're going to do is print out your file from Etsy. Then we're going to start by cutting out our templates. It's important to remember to cut out the ear template carefully so that the pieces fit together and attach to the headband properly. It doesn't have to be perfect, just take your time. Next, you're going to take your foam. I just cut a square off of the big sheet that I already had, and we are going to trace our templates onto our foam board. I always start with my insert template. There's no reason for that. I just like to do it that way. And then as I'm tracing them, I try to keep them close together. It just makes cutting them out a little bit easier. I prefer to use a Sharpie when tracing my templates onto the foam board, but use whatever makes you happy. It's just easier to cut out with the X-Acto knife when you have a larger line to follow. I'm weird and label my fabric piece. There's no rhyme or reason. I don't know why. I just do it. So when cutting out with the X-Acto knife, just find the angle that suits you best. I usually cut it in my lap, so I'm a little bit awkward here trying to do it on my desk for you guys to see and not cut my desk for the second time in doing so. There are several ways you could cut this out. This is just what works for me. I'm no professional. I've just found what's worked and went with it. If your cuts aren't perfect, that's okay. Mickey's ears have never been anatomically correct anyway. Just do it as close to the line as you can, and you can also go back in and shave off a little extra if necessary. So it's better to cut outside the line than inside the line because obviously we can't add foam back to the ear. Let me add that it's not completely necessary to cut out your fabric foam piece. You could just use the sheet of paper from the template, but this does make it easier, especially if you're making multiple pairs. Remember when placing your fabric piece that your ears will tilt off to the side, so you will have to turn them a little bit if you want your print facing straight up and down on your ears. I use a pen to trace. You don't have to use a pen, but I find that the marker tends to run on the fabric, so I just like the crisp line of the pen when doing this. Here I'm going to show you that you can actually use your fabric piece and just trace that directly onto it. It does make it a little more time consuming, but if that's what you prefer as opposed to cutting out the foam board, then you do you, boo. I ain't mad at you. Now I'm going to show you how I get that little ducktail piece that flips onto the back of the ear to secure the polyfoam inside. So basically, I just align my scissors with the bottom edge of the template, and I'm going to cut straight to that edge. Now, holding tight to the line is not as important on the fabric. If you have extra fabric, that's only going to help you. However, you do not want to go inside the line because that's going to take from the fabric that you have to pull around and secure on the back side of your ear. But precision is definitely not the vibe on fabric. So you don't have to take your time. You could cut an inch outside the line, and honestly, it would not affect the outcome of the ears. As I'm coming up on that second edge, I just want to be careful to make sure that I've aligned it right and follow that cut straight through to the bottom of the fabric. Now I could trim this little flap up a little bit, but I'm just gonna leave it. Now we have our first fabric cut out and our little ducktail, so we're ready to move on to the next step. This tube of glue can make up to 3 sets of ears if you use it sparingly. Typically I take my glue all the way around the edge and secure it, but I'm going to show you guys how I started. So I just dab some glue across the top section, and then I will fold down the fabric and secure it, and then continue to move the rest of the way around the ear. This just made me feel more comfortable as I was learning how the glue works and attempting not to make a mess. I use this finger protectant because the glue says that you're not supposed to get it on your skin, but who am I kidding? I will definitely have it all over my hands by the end of this video. Full transparency, your finger will sizzle like a sausage inside this little silicone sauna, but it's worth it to not be peeling glue off of my finger for 2 hours when I'm done. So you're just going to continue to smooth your edges down, and here you see me scraping up a little extra glue, and then I just apply it to the top of the fabric because it does help keep it flat against your insert. If you happen to see a piece of fabric with no adhesive underneath, just go back in with your glue and add it in there, and then continue to press down the edges all the way around to the bottom. Now remember, we're not going to glue the bottom edge of this yet because we still have to put our polyfill inside. So our little ducktail will be hanging down when we're done gluing. You're going to continue to smooth down the edges as you work your way around. You'll see that some try to come up. Just push them back down. Once the glue starts to cure, that won't happen anymore. But until then, you just want to try and make sure everything is as flat as possible so that the pieces fit together really well and that the glue adheres properly. Once you've secured the fabric all the way around, you're just going to want to take a second look, smooth down anything that could be sticking up, get off any excess glue if possible. And honestly, I'll glance over at the ears that I've finished as I'm working on other ones, just to make sure nothing needs to be tapped down. When you're done, your earpiece should look something similar to this. And it's officially ready to be stuffed. Before I put my polyfill in my ear, I like to go through it and pull out any of the woozies. You'll see one in a minute. So that thing up at the top, the little thick squiggly line, yeah, that's a woozie. And you can see them outside of the ear. So I try to pull out any of those thick pieces that I know are going to show and just make the ears look uneven. I feel like my voice is so monotone, but I'm trying to speak clearly for you guys, and I don't have a fancy microphone. I'm talking directly into my speaker, so bear with me. Once you've gotten out the woozies and pulled your polyfill apart, you can start stuffing it into your ear. Don't freak out. I promise your fabric is secure and you can literally like push the stuff in there. It's not going to come apart. I literally use a chopstick from my kitchen to spread it around and make everything at least appear even. I believe in multi-purpose tools in this house, guys. I will find something and use it for its non-intended purpose before I go out and buy something. Just continue to move your polyfill around until there's no lumps and bumps and everything looks smooth. Guys, we do not want to be walking around with Conor McGregor mouse ears, capiche? Now you're ready to seal this bad boy up. So you're going to run a strip of glue across the bottom and then flip your ducktail up to secure the polyfill inside. So I usually do one strip across the bottom and then fold it up. After I get that smoothed out and secured, I usually add a little bit more glue just to flatten down the rest of that flap against the back of the insert. Guys, don't forget that this can be moved around. Just because you've glued it down doesn't mean you can't lift it up and reposition or whatever you need to do. It's not cement. It can be moved around and manipulated. You just want to make sure that it gets put down fairly quickly so that it can dry the way it's intended to. Your insert should look something like this. Before you attach these pieces, you want to make sure that they're both going on the same side of the ear. So press them together and make sure that everything's correct before you attach them. I start by running the glue along the outside of the ear inserts and the bottom. And typically that's all I do, but I actually fill in the middle here and go a little adhesive crazy just for fun, honestly. If this makes you feel like you'll have a more secure bond, then go for it. However, I am not using this glue sparingly, like I mentioned earlier in the video. As soon as Glue-Palooza is over, you're going to want to take your other piece and just align it the best you can over the top. Then you're going to press around the edges just to make sure all of that glue is reaching the other side. Guys, these can be moved and repositioned, no biggie. Remember that word multi-purpose we were talking about earlier? Well, this is my book weight, and while not necessary, it does make me feel better to have added pressure to the top while the glue dries. Now that our ears have dried, we're going to take our E6000 and run it along the outer edge of our ear. Again, you can do this in sections. You don't have to run it all the way around when you're just getting used to how the glue works. After we've applied our glue, we're just going to grab our pre-cut trim piece and start to attach it from the very bottom edge. I like to have a little bit extra hanging over, and I just press it against the bottom of the ear to help keep it secure. After you've attached your trim, you just want to make sure everything's positioned correctly. So because I'm using a wider piece of trim than I would typically use, I'm just pushing back the edges to make sure it's not overwhelming the front. Then you'll press the trim into the glue and just make sure everything's secure. Following that, you'll want to cut off any excess trim so that the ears fit flush along the headband. Now, because I keep it real with you guys, this is just how some of the headbands come. They're not always cut like perfectly square as I would describe it. Sometimes one side goes down longer than the other. This is not going to affect how we attach our ears. You're just going to pretend that both sides are the length of the shorter one because that's how it will fit on your head. One may just come down a little lower behind your ear. I like to use extra foam pieces to prop my ears on while the glue dries, and I have found it really helpful. You'll want to take the time to make sure that your ears are aligned correctly on the headband, unless you want to look like Quasimodo, and in that case, just proceed. So what I like to do is grab my tape measure and just run it across, make sure everything looks level. You can see here that one of the ears is lower than the other, so I either need to move one up or one down, and that's usually determined by the size of my bow. If it's a bigger bow, I can move one side down and it won't make a difference. If it's a smaller bow, you'll want them closer to the top. After I've determined ear placement, I use the glue to mark a spot on each side where the bottom of the ear will sit. Here I'm checking my glue dots just to make sure that they look even, and they look great, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step. If you hang out for a few, you will see that I'm fixing to make a huge mistake. So now you're going to take your ear, apply your glue generously but not too generously. You want enough for it to adhere, but not to where it's squishing out from underneath and going all over the headband. So a little tip that I use whenever I apply the ear to the headband is I actually take the front piece that's going to be on the front of the ear and I tip it forward and kind of roll it backwards. I don't just press it down directly on the headband, because if any glue does happen to come out, it's going to come out on the back side of the ear. Once you have your ear attached to the headband, you're just going to hold it in place for about a minute. After this step, I lay it down and let that ear prop up on that foam piece to hold it in place so that it doesn't slide backwards on the headband, which also means that the other ear will be attached while the headband is on the desk. I'd like to add that when using hot glue, you do not have to do all of this waiting around. It's instantaneous and honestly, much more fun to work with. If you can see where I botched the set of ears, drop it in the comments. Now we're going to apply the second piece of trim that runs along the base of the ear. If it's a thicker piece of trim, I'll apply the glue directly to the back of it. But if it's thinner, sometimes I will just run it along the base of the ear itself and try my best not to make a mess. As you can see, from sitting for a few minutes, my glue looks kind of goopy, so I typically wipe it off with a scrap piece of fabric to give myself a steady stream, which is much easier to work with and control. Guys, I'm still in shock that I have not noticed the other side of that headband. This is what we in the ADHD world call hyperfocus. Let's go ahead and attach our trim. Start on the front side and then work my way around to the back. I'll cut off any excess trim that I know I'm not going to need before securing the trim to the back of the ear. If you're using a trim that frays on the ends, you can always take a little lighter and just tap, tap, tap it on those little pieces and it will singe them down to give you a flush end. Now you're just going to bring your glue around the edges into the back of the ear. You want to apply it generously back here as well, but I try to keep it on the fabric and not the headband itself because that's actually where the trim is going to attach. You may need to hold it there for a second if the ribbon tries to unravel and come back around the front. It doesn't happen often, but depending on the material, it's been known to happen. You can see mine came off a little bit there, but no problem. I just press it back down and hold it for a second while I'm attaching it to the back. So I like to overlap these pieces on the back just for extra security. And again, this is not cement, so these pieces are still fluid until it's dry. Just push everything back into place if it slips off. And then I like to let it sit for a few minutes just to make sure everything's dried properly. And here I am about to realize that I made a big boo-boo. You can literally see the moment it hits me, and I'm only sharing because these things do happen. Wait, did I really? Throws ears. Yeah, highly annoyed with myself right now. But on the plus side, the ears didn't come apart, so you know that glue is strong. And now I'm just coming to terms with the fact that I have to do my first ear transplant on my first tutorial. Yay! Words were said. While we're waiting on transplant recovery, I just want to show you guys, I've had a few people in my comments say that it's impossible to get fabric for these prices, and this is a 1/4 yard of fabric. It's obviously Disney. It's enough to make maybe 2 or 3 pairs of ears, and I paid $1.34 for it. So guys, this is not impossible. It's totally doable. Shout out to my haters. Another way to cut cost is using fabric from the Dollar Tree. Clearly this was $1.25, and this is the fabric we're going to use to make our bow. They have several other prints and styles to choose from, so definitely check them out before you go get cuts of fabric for your bow. Something to note is if you want to use this same fabric for the center part of your bow, then you're going to want to cut about an inch strip down the side of your fabric before you start making your bow. I'm also going to show you some alternatives later in the video on how you can make that piece of your bow and how you can attach your bow. So we're just going to spread our fabric out and add our polyfill. It doesn't have to be perfect, just throw it in there. You do want to make sure that it's semi-even because that will be on separate sides of the bow and you don't want it looking all cattywampus. Now we're going to fold in each side of the bow. Guys, this really is just so simple. Make sure you're flattening it out as you go. You don't want it to look too messy. And then when you fold that last piece, you're just going to tuck a little flip of fabric underneath. That's a little much. Yep, a little less. And that's just to keep it from sticking out the other side of the bow or looking weird on the back after it's made. You'll see what I mean here shortly. So then we're going to pick up the fabric and do an accordion style fold from the top down to the bottom. Sometimes you get it on the first try, sometimes you get it on the 21st try. It really is in God's hands at that point because this fabric has a mind of its own. And just keep working with it until it looks the way you want it to. If you don't like the points on the fabric, you can literally just tuck them in to give more of a rounded appearance. Guys, these bows are so customizable in such an easy and practical way. Make it your own, do what you want to do with it. Put in as much or as little effort as you want to. Once the bow is to your liking, we're going to grab a zip tie and secure down the center part of the bow. Make sure to keep it pinched until you have it wrapped around and zipped, if that's what we're calling it. Do not, I repeat, do not zip it all the way down. We still have work to do on the bow. So now that we have it on there, we're going to take a look at the front and you see it's a little uneven. So I'm going to pull a little bit of fabric and a little bit of fluff over to the other side to just level things out until I get it the way I want it. So it's looking good. Not a big deal. I'm not using this bow anyways. I just did this tutorial to show you guys how to make a bow. I'm actually working on a bow I've never made before for this particular headband. This is the annoying piece I was telling you about earlier that we had to fold under, and you can just cut it off if you don't want it, but don't cut too far to where the fabric slips out from the zip tie and your bow comes undone. Next, you're going to want to snip off that zip tie as close to the base as you can get it, because it's going to have to fit behind whatever you choose to wrap around the center of your bow. I personally like to incorporate my trim into my bow because I feel like it ties things together. So if that's what you want to do, you would just wrap it around, put some glue right there, and secure that piece of trim around the bow. Then you could just glue it directly onto the top of the headband if that's what you want to do. You can also wrap a piece of fabric around the headband and the bow for double security, but it's not necessary and it really is just a personal preference. Here I'm adding a second piece of trim. I typically stop at the first piece and that's perfectly fine if that's what you want to do, but this trim actually matches the pleather look on the bow, so it does tie it in together well, and it also covers up that little bit of extra glue from the ear transplant. So again, say it with me, multi-purpose. Let's go over some different bows and ways to attach them. So here you have the bow that I made for this headband. I could just wrap that piece of trim around the center, glue it, and then glue it to the bow, and voila, it would be done. Don't forget when doing it this way that you do need to press and hold your bow to the headband for probably a minute or so to ensure it adheres correctly. Another option is to take a scrap piece of fabric from your bow and just fold it a few times, then run it along the center of your bow, like so. You could attach it around the headband or just wrap it around to the back and glue it. I do like this look. However, I think I'm going to stick with the trim that I have going around the outer edge of the ear. Again, you could glue this directly or wrap it around the bow, either way. That's the great thing about this is it's so customizable. You can do as little or as much as you want to. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be super simple, or you can add a ton of personal touches to make them your own. I've decided to make my bow removable because there's actually another style that I might prefer over this one. So I'm just using an elastic strip here. It's what I make my toddler and infant headbands out of. And I'm just going to tie it around the back making sure to cover the zip tie, and then trimming those extra pieces of fabric. I'm going to attach my bow right where the headband starts, and then I'm going to cut it right where the headband ends. Hot tip, if your trim starts to fray, you can literally use a lighter to get those pieces down and give you a flush end on your pieces. Now I'm going to add a dot of glue to the front of this trim and attach it to my bow. This may not have been the best headband for a tutorial, but I feel like it's shown you guys a bunch of different ways to do things instead of just one set way to do it. I really appreciate you guys sticking this out. I hope it was helpful in your headband journey. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I appreciate you guys so much.